I felt a little inadequate to this task, and so there are 4 of us up here. We promised to keep our remarks short, but we each represent a different part of Jim Lafferty's work, and we wanted to make sure that you saw the full picture of Jim. Jim Lafferty came to the Guild 50 years ago when I was in high school. And no, I wasn't in grammar school, I can't lie. And I am one of the older members of the Guild at this point, which is disturbing to me. But, you know, I'll ask everybody to hold up their Medicare cards. But Jim was hired by Ernie Goodman, who you've heard about tonight, and by George Crockett to organize the Guild's work in the South in 1963. And from there, Jim has gone on to organize in the Guild for the last 50 years. He was the executive director of the Guild, but in 1991, we became really fortunate here in Los Angeles. He and Bonnie Garvin, his wife, moved out to Los Angeles. I always think he got run out of New York, but he came to Los Angeles, and one of the first things, my first contact was Jim called me and asked me to rejoin the Guild. I had quit because of a political dispute with the then president, and Jim worked on me for a while because I wasn't easy, as you all know, and I came back, and I'm so glad I did, because I'm working with Jim over these last years has really given me a home in this city. We like to say in this city that we've changed the political landscape on protest in this city. And while it's not perfect, it is a far cry. It is a far cry from the rubber bullets, the batons, and the horses we have all experienced in this city for the last several decades. And that really changed for a number of reasons, but most importantly because of the work of the Lawyers Guild led by Jim. I think the police see him as sort of the rational person out there as compared to me. And they'll always say, well, where's Jim? And I'll say, you're talking to me now. But Jim clearly is a person who has helped us reach that kind of resolution where we are now strong advocates and we win. And we win in the streets and we win in the courts, and we do that because of Jim. So just one more quick statement, because I promised my brother Dick Sobel that, that I would only say 2 sentences. I know I've said more. But one of the things that Jim does is really reach out to all the law students, do trainings on how to be a legal observer. And as my former law students know, we have really strict rules here. And one is you do not get engaged with the police when you're a legal observer. In closing, I would like to say that Jim violated every rule of being a legal observer. When he got arrested in New York last year, at the Occupy stuff, I looked at that videotape and I said, what were you thinking?
Carol and I agreed to split 2 minutes. So in the remaining 15 seconds, I'm here for really one reason, and that is that I am one of Jim's oldest professional friends, and that is that I joined his law firm in 1970, Lafferty, Riosti, Jabara, Papakian, Smith, and Sobel. And there were really 2 things that Jim taught us about political work. One is political organizing, and the second was coalition work. And as many of you know who were involved in the anti-war movement, Jim was a leader in the anti-war movement, and he had certain principles. The main principle that he taught us and he taught the people that he worked with was that it is critical for every organization to agree on a set of principles. Once those principles were agreed upon, everyone could join. And Jim was non-sectarian, Jim was inclusive, And Jim said the fight that we must have is over the principles, not who can participate. And and those were the two main lessons that he gave us. He also was a real participant in partnership meetings. Partnership meetings occurred almost once a year. And the only criteria was that everyone had to bring a cigar. They were the shortest partnership meetings that anyone had to go through, and we thank you for it. Jim, on behalf of the firm and your friends, we thank you and we love you, and continue for another 40 years.
My name is Brian Becker. I'm the national coordinator of the Answer Coalition, and I want to pick up on what Dick said about Jim's role in the struggle against the Vietnam War. You can just bring that videotape forward 30 years to 10 years ago, almost this month, when hundreds of thousands of people started to coalesce and assemble in the streets to say no to Bush's war in Iraq. And there, in the leadership, was Jim Lafferty, refusing the demonization, refusing to go along, saying, yes, the people of this country can be a historical factor. And in those few short months, October, November, December, January of 2003, February 2003, when millions of people took to the streets, if you can remember it, all over the world. The New York Times said it was the second superpower, that is, the alternative to the U.S. empire, and Jim Lafferty was right there doing what he did 30 years earlier in Vietnam. So we all owe Jim Lafferty that special role, the human continuum, the legacy for older people, younger people, the next generation of people who say, yes, we can resist the U.S. empire. Now they're coming again in Iran, in Syria, and elsewhere, and Jim Lafferty, the National Lawyers Guild, and all of the progressive organizations must stand together and say, no to war, yes to jobs and education and housing and health care, and we know Jim Lafferty is the leader of that kind of movement, our movement. Thank you.
I'm Mara Verheyden-Hilliard. I'm the executive director of the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund and the outgoing co-chair with Carol Sobel of the National Lawyers Guild Mass Defense Committee. And it is a great honor for me to stand here tonight and honor Jim Lafferty. You know, when you look at the cover that you all have right here tonight, and you look at Arthur Kanoy, a man that was standing up and fighting against extreme demonization at a moment when it was terrifying to stand up against the power of the U.S. government, putting socialists and communists in jail, destroying people's lives, depriving people of careers. And that is a continuum of the National Lawyers Guild, and everything that the National Lawyers Guild has ever fought for. Everyone in this room made a decision at some point in their lives that they were going to fight against the powers, no matter what it takes. And that's what Jim Lafferty stands for. He is the continuum. He stands generation and spans, sorry Jim, a couple generations. And he stands up for everything we believe in. At every moment when we think, should we turn inwards? Should we just focus on ourselves? Or should we turn outwards and fight the powers? Should we stand outwards and fight the police? Should we stand up for what we believe in? And that's what Jim does every single day. So it's a great honor and a joy and a deserved honor for Jim, because Jim represents the best of everything that we all believe in and the fight that we all believe in. So thank you, Jim Lafferty.
Well, you know, I didn't, like the rest of us, I didn't join the Guild to get a discount on my car rentals. It's what you just saw from those four people and so many like them in this room, and the opportunity to be comrades and friends with those folks. That's why I joined the Guild. I may not have known it at the time, but that's what I've come to learn. And I'm so grateful for this award, but frankly, I'm all the more grateful and much more grateful for the comradeship and the friendship and the struggle that we're all a part of, and that you've all been a part of that with me for so many years. I want to thank many of my friends are here tonight, and they came in some cases from quite some distance, and I so appreciate you being here with me. It means so much to me. Bonnie is sitting there, the love of my life. I love her more than the day we got married, and I suspect it's because she has tolerated all of my mishigas for 40 years, and that's one of her more lovable qualities. You know, the Lawyers Guild is, I don't think I somehow feel we haven't fully appreciated yet or acknowledged the fact that the Guild is 75 years old, and during all of those 75 years, and at some points, particularly during those 75 years, the government of this country tried its damnedest to shut this organization down. And it didn't matter what they threw at us. They tried to put us on the Un-American list. They spied on us, and so we sued their ass, and we won. There is simply nothing that can stand in the way of the National Lawyers Guild, and if they haven't learned it by now, they're dumber than I think. You know, as somebody was kind enough to point out, I'm only 1 year younger than the National Lawyers Guild is. And it's a very different world today than it was in 1937 when the Guild was founded, or in 1938 when I was founded. But seriously, and I'm not going to give you my whole life story, I had an hour or two here, and I had some pictures of my first steps and my daughter's first steps, but later in the other room I'll show those for those who are still here. But seriously, I was in those days referred to as the bastard son of a very poor immigrant, single immigrant mother in Detroit, and for whatever reason, I was always a dreamer. And I can remember in grade school, I was constantly being criticized by my teachers. Jimmy, where are you? You're on dreamland. You're always dreaming. You're not paying attention. And there was probably some truth to that, and I wasn't quite sure what I was dreaming about, but I was dreaming. But you know, it's important to remember that in those days, you could be poor, and I could get it, and I did, a great public education in Detroit. And I could go to college if you worked hard and go to law school. And I got out, and I didn't owe a dime to anybody, the way all you poor folks, law students do now, they get out and owe all this money. It was a different world. And it was a consequence of that I got to meet first Ernie Goodman and George Crockett, who you've heard already about tonight, two of the founding members of the National Lawyers Guild. two of the greatest lawyers this country has ever seen. And I count myself as lucky every day that happened to me, because it gave me the privilege, as I said earlier, of working for all of these years now with some of the great lawyers and legal workers and political organizers of this country and, frankly, of this world. Ernie hired me right out of law school, which is one reason why I have so much confidence in law students today. The law students today, I can tell you, know a hell of a lot more than I did when I got out of law school. I'm not being modest. I mean, that's just a fact. And you're a lot more politically sophisticated today than I was. But Ernie hired me right out of law school and gave me the chance right off the bat. That was our work in the South, that historic work. We don't pay enough attention talking about it. We changed the whole world at that time, or the whole country at that time. We established whole new laws. We were a boost to the civil rights movement that they needed when they needed it. And that, too, has been the history of the Guild. And it gave me the opportunity to meet people who then all along the way have inspired me. In the South, I met Mary Robinson. Who was Mary Robinson? Amazing woman. On her 70th birthday, she lived in Hattiesburg. She sees a demonstration going on. She joins it. It's for voters' rights. They arrest her. They throw her in jail. They take her one winter coat. When she gets out of jail and gets back to her one-room house in the woods outside of Hattiesburg, dog is dead. They've killed the dog. Cross burning still on her front lawn, still smoldering. And I said, Mary, what possessed you at age 70 to finally join a demonstration, knowing damn well what was going to happen? She said, Mr. Lafferty, that's an easy one. I'd been trying to register to vote for years, and they never let me do it. And when I saw those kids walking that day, I said, I've had enough, the hell with it. And I joined that demonstration, and when the doors of that jail closed on me, Mr. Lafferty, that was the first day of my life I ever felt totally free. It's that which keeps us going. As I said the other night when we were opening our convention, we had all those movement groups up on stage. I said, hey, if it wasn't for those folks, if it wasn't for the people who are really doing the work, there'd be no point in us existing. We only exist because there is a movement of people who are prepared to fight against all odds. And then somebody mentioned the Vietnam War. And another example of how you learn along the way if you live long enough. Young woman walks in my office one day in Detroit. I was still national director of the Guild. She says, Mr. Lafferty, we think you should be the chair of a new coalition we're putting together here called the Anti-War Coalition Against Vietnam. I thought she was kind of nuts or naive. I said, hell, I don't think there's 100 people in this city who could find Vietnam on a map. And I doubt there's that many who would be willing to do anything about it. But I agreed to do it, but thinking that, well, that probably wasn't going to work. I know what to do. I'll run for office. So I run for Congress as one of the peace candidates back in the late 60s. Well, we know how that worked out. So I hope you'll forgive my early ignorance in thinking, and my vanity in thinking that we could elect our way out of imperialist wars. In those days, myself, some of our law partners, and you've heard from Dick and some of the other wonderful folks, we specialized in draft and military law, and I was inspired by people like Bill Smith from Los Angeles, who was a pioneer in military law and draft law work. And so we set up draft counseling centers all over Detroit and all over the Midwest. We probably kept, I don't know, hundreds, thousands probably of young men out of Vietnam. But my point is, they inspired us and did more for us in some ways than we probably did for them, because their courage, their willingness to go to jail if that's what it took, rather than to sell their souls and go to Vietnam. Can you imagine how inspiring that was to a young lawyer at that point in time? I tell you it was. And in 1971, when I was part of the national leadership of the anti-Vietnam War movement, we had an invitation to go to Hanoi during the war and meet with Van Van Dong and folks there. And we did, and my God, what an education, what an inspiration again that was. Wherever I walked in Hanoi, bombs were falling. I went to Bach Mai Hospital one morning, it had just been bombed. Everywhere I walked, the Vietnamese people gave me a smile and a welcome. Later that evening, we had an audience with Van Van Dong, then the head of North Vietnam, and I said to him, I'm sort of amazed. Here I am from America, which is such havoc on your country, and everybody's so friendly. He said, we make it a point to teach our people that it's not the people of the United States that are our enemy, it's the government of the United States that are our enemy. And one of the Americans with me started to cry. He had been a bomber pilot and had dropped bombs on Vietnam. And now he was in the peace movement. And we'd brought him along. He started to cry and he said, well, what's wrong? And he said what was wrong. Van Van Dong jumped up, started to cry himself, threw his arms around. He said, it doesn't matter. You've come back as a friend. That's what matters. You're now here as a friend. And so when I would think about that, and years later, I would think about those lawyers, like Lynn Stewart, like George Crockett, who went to jail defending during the anti-communist period, who were willing to not let the government decide who their friends should be, but let their conscience decide who their friends should be. And that's been true for the Guild for all of our 75 years. It's what's right that governs us, not what some government says should be right. And more recently, you know, as you get older, you can get a little cynical if you're not careful. What are you laughing at? You can get a little cynical if you're not careful. And along come the DREAM actors, the DREAM Act students, the immigrant rights movement. Jesus. You listened to Nady a little while ago. Isn't she something? And she would be the first to tell you that there's dozens and dozens more just like her. And they come and they sit down in the streets of this country, and they're not documented, and they could be deported just like that. And when they're arrested and carried away, how much time goes by before the next group come and sit down in the same damn street and get arrested? And the next group, and the next group. If that doesn't inspire you, my friends, you're dead. Well, in the Lawyers Guild, our slogan is justice is a constant struggle. The civil rights movement, the women's movement, the GLBTQ movement, labor movement, you name it, all of these movements have demanded constant struggle. And when they struggled constantly, and with us at their side, they had great victories. It's the people's movements and the Lawyers Guild defending them that have therefore been my teachers and my inspiration. I've learned, for example, and this I think is the most critical thing I've learned, that the groups we work with, the groups we represent, the movements we represent, frankly know a hell of a lot more about what they need and how to get it than we do. That young woman who came to my office in Detroit about getting into the chair in the Anna Warhol, she was right and I was wrong. You couldn't elect your way out of that war. What we did instead was organize such a massive movement of people in the streets of this America that it didn't matter which of those damn politicians sat in Washington or in the Congress or in the courts. Nobody could continue the war because of the power of that movement. And so what we learned and must never forget, I think, is that the question we should always be asking ourselves is, well, not who's sitting in the court or who's in the White House or who's in the Congress, but who is marching in the streets of America? As I say, I'm 74 years old, and perhaps because of my age, fellow Guild members, I heard that applause. Thank you. Let's hear it for the 74-year-olds in the room, yeah. Perhaps it's because of my age. Fellow Guild members and other political comrades are often saying to me, hey, Jim, how is it you haven't burned out yet? What keeps you going? God knows this world doesn't seem to be getting any better or going in the right direction. Why are you still at it? Now, normally, when asked that question, I was thinking of Carol. Normally, when I'm asked that question, I say something smart-ass like, well, you know, for me, a day without screaming at cops at a protest is a day without sunshine, you know, so. But it's more than that, although that's a big part of it. You see, seriously, I'm old enough to know that things can change. I've lived long enough to remember when it was supposedly impossible to win civil rights battles in Mississippi, when it was supposedly impossible to stop a U.S. war of intervention, when it was supposedly impossible, you know, to sue the FBI as we did and win. Impossible to win rights for undocumented youth in America who all they wanted to do was go to a college in America. But we learned then that with the right movement, the right strategy, the right tactics, nothing is impossible. I'm going to wrap it pretty quick because we've got some important business to do, and I want to make sure you're here for it. Don't get me wrong. I'm no Pollyanna. I can see that the way the country is going, the likelihood is that the next 75 years of the National Lawyers Guild and the movements we serve are likely to be a hell of a lot tougher than the last 75 years. Because if we ever lived in a democracy, we sure as hell don't live in one now. If we ever lived in a system where the two capitalist parties offered a meaningful choice, a choice that took us forward, as opposed to just slowing our slide into the abyss of barbarism, we sure as hell don't have that choice now. Whatever the outcome of next month's election, we're still going to wake up the day after and find ourselves with the same battles, still living in a capitalist oligarchy, greedy for more, still as repressive as ever, if not more so, and still needing the Lawyers Guild more than ever. So if there was ever a time when it's up to we the people, not the politicians, it's now. If we ever needed new thinking like the Dreamers and the Occupiers have offered to us, if ever we needed the National Lawyers Guild, it's now. We need new movements, and hopefully they will arise. We see the glimmer of them. New movements that aren't going to simply settle for reforms that could be snatched away, but revolutionary reforms, because nothing short of that kind of revolution will ever bring us to what the Lawyers Guild truly wants. But finally, friends, really finally, friends, I am full of hope. Because I see the shoots of new and more revolutionary movements springing up all over this country and all over the world. I see the strength and commitment of all the younger members of the Guild. It's sad when I come to these conventions and a lot of the folks that I used to see at these conventions aren't with us anymore. But what a thrill it is to look around a room at a plenary and see most of the people there are very young and smart and courageous. And we have a diverse group that's willing to fight and fight and fight just like the people who founded this organization. So that gives you hope. Yes, I'm hopeful. Because if we will remember that all empires, be they big or small, one day fall. If we'll remember what Arundhati Roy says, you know, when talking about corporate power, they be few, but we be many. Yeah. If we will remember our great victories of the past, if we remember quite simply that history itself is on our side, then our day will surely come. And on behalf of that great day, I thank the Guild for giving substance to that little boy's dreams, and I salute the National Lawyers Guild, and I join you in our next 75 years of struggle. Thank you.